This video is brought to you by our book. Find out more and find out how you can get an exclusive free pin badge with your purchase at the end of this video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Labour's surprising victory in Batley and Spen, and try and explain what it means. So let's get straight to it. On Thursday there was, a by-election in the constituency of Batley and Spen. This by-election was triggered by the resignation of incumbent Labour MP Tracy Brabin, who gave up the seat after winning the West Yorkshire mayoralty in May. Brabin was elected to the seat in 2016 after the murder of MP Joe Cox. For those of you who don't know, Joe Cox was elected to Batley and Spen in the 2015 general election. Cox was murdered by 53-year-old gardener Thomas Mair in June of 2016 after being shot and stabbed multiple times. The judge that sentenced Mair stated that there was no doubt that Mair was motivated by white supremacism and exclusive nationalism most associated with Nazism. Brabin won the ensuing by-election in 2016, which Conservatives stood aside for, and held the seat in 2017 and 2019. When she resigned, Labour chose Kim Leadbeater, Joe Cox's sister, as their new candidate. The bookies, Labour and the majority of political commentators all expected Labour to lose this seat, largely because Batley and Spen is a North English Brexit voting constituency, sometimes described as a red wall seat, and the Conservatives have been particularly good at nicking these off Labour in recent times. It's worth noting though that while Batley and Spen looks like a red wall seat, in that it's Northern and Brexit voting, it's not really a red wall seat because it's only been Labour since 1997, unlike, say, Hartlepool, a classic red wall seat which has been Labour since the 1940s, until the Tories nicked it earlier this year. Nonetheless, with Boris Johnson's approval ratings way ahead of Starmer's, and the Conservatives enjoying a steady 10-point lead against Labour in voting intention, everyone expected Batley and Spen to go blue. Anyway, to everyone's surprise, Leadbeater somehow edged out a victory over Ryan Stevenson, the Conservative candidate. To be completely honest, we'd actually written and animated a video all on the premise that Labour would lose, so this was more than a little annoying, but I guess that's what happens when you listen to the bookies these days. TLDR self-pity aside, turnout was 47.6%. Labour won 35.3% of the vote, with 13,296 votes, while the Conservatives won 34.4% of the vote, with 12,973 votes, meaning that Labour won by just 323 votes. In third place was George Galloway, representing the Workers' Party of Britain, with 21.9% of the vote. For those of you who don't know him, George Galloway is a sort of political mercenary. Galloway was originally the Labour MP for Glasgow Hillhead, where he held office from 1987 until 2005. After being expelled from Labour in 2003, in large part because of his opposition to the Iraq War, Galloway joined forces with the Socialist Workers' Party in England to create a new party called the Respect Party, which basically just opposed the Iraq War. In 2005, Galloway ran as the Respect Party candidate for the East London seat of Bethnal Green and Bow, and somehow won. It's worth noting that Bethnal Green has a remarkably high Muslim population, who were both more likely to be anti-war and more likely to support Galloway. We only mention this because it helps explain Galloway's political movements. Galloway then ran in the Bradford West by-election in 2012, and again pulled off a shock victory with 56% of the vote. This was in part due to strong support among the large Muslim population, although it's worth noting that Galloway won a plurality in all Muslim minority wards as well. Anyway, it's a similar thing here. Batley and Spen is a volatile constituency with a higher than average Muslim population, so Galloway decided to have a go. Galloway's platform is apparently economically radical and socially conservative, but most of his focus has been on the socially conservative bit. In the run-up to the by-election, he appeared at a free speech rally with Lawrence Fox, where he suggested that parents should have the right to decide what their children are taught, a reference to a recent incident in which a teacher in Batley was suspended for showing his students the Charlie Hebdo picture of Mohammed. He also apparently accused Labour of being trans maniacs who hate the British flag. This sort of anti-woke stance appeals to both Muslims and older voters, who are more likely to be socially conservative. The last thing worth mentioning about Galloway is that he's been talking a lot about Palestine and Kashmir, and has suggested that Starmer doesn't support Muslims on both issues. Essentially, Galloway's accused Starmer of being too pro-Israel when it comes to Palestine and too pro-India when it comes to Kashmir. Anyway, the reason we mention Galloway is that it helps to explain why this by-election got so nasty. Presumably, in reaction to the pressure from Galloway, Labour released these flyers explaining Leadbeater's stance on Palestine and Kashmir. And Leadbeater posed for photos with constituents wearing t-shirts that depicted the whole of Israel as Palestine, which understandably upset some people. Perhaps the dodgiest bit of campaigning was this flyer, which implied that Boris Johnson was too close to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who's a Hindu. This was seen as stoking inter-ethnic tension between Pakistani Muslims and Indian Hindus, and Labour Friends of India asked Labour to withdraw it. Labour weren't the only ones using dodgy tactics though. There were also fake Labour flyers that said that the biggest threat to our precious multicultural society is whiteness. Labour activists were beaten and egged while campaigning, and Leadbeater was shouted at by Muslim parents who felt that their children were being forced to learn about LGBTQ+ issues. There were also leaked WhatsApp messages taking issue with Leadbeater's sexuality, and reports that campaigners were attacking Keir Starmer for having a Jewish wife. Now, we should be completely clear. We're not blaming Galloway for the tone of the by-election, or saying that he was there with the intention of causing trouble. However, it's true to say that Galloway's presence brought ethnic and religious issues to the forefront, and this goes some of the way to explaining the particularly, let's say, passionate tone of the by-election, because obviously people get a lot more worked up about, say, Palestine than the usual by-election talking points like potholes and bin collection. So anyway, what does this mean? Well, the main takeaway is don't rely on the bookies and the political bigwigs like us, who, it turns out, are basically always wrong in our predictions. But what should the two main parties infer from this result? Well, in normal times, holding a seat as an opposition party in a by-election wouldn't be too much to cheer about, but given how badly everybody expected Labour to do, this is a pretty good result. It goes to show that even when competing against George Galloway for the ethnic minority vote, Labour can compete in these northern Brexity seats. If anything, it's a bit of a lesson for the Conservatives. They've now lost the last two by-elections, having expected to win both, and there are two lessons to be learnt from this. First, both were lost in part due to a sort of electoral complacency. In Batley and Spen, for example, Ryan Stevenson was notably absent compared to Leadbeater and Galloway. In fact, according to Anusha Kellyan at The New Statesman, he literally ran away from her when she tried to interview him. Presumably this is because the Conservatives thought they could win by standing on the sidelines while Galloway and Labour scrap it out, and, to be fair, it nearly worked, but not quite. Essentially, even if Boris Johnson is miles ahead in the polls, the Conservatives probably have to do a bit more legwork to guarantee that translates into results at the local level. The other thing that Batley and Spen and Chesham and Amersham demonstrate is how soft the Conservative vote is these days. Basically, voters are far less loyal than they used to be. This is true for both Labour and the Conservatives. Labour voters used to always vote Labour, and Conservative voters used to always vote Conservative, but they're now a lot happier to lend their votes out to other parties. This is what happened in Chesham and Amersham, where a whole load of Conservative voters swung to the Lib Dems, and apparently also in Batley and Spen, where it seems like at least some otherwise Conservative voters were persuaded by Galloway's anti-woke stance. What do you think though? Were you surprised to see a Labour victory at Batley and Spen? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Before we go though, I wanted to shout out our book, Brexit the Colouring Book, and our exclusive new bundle. The book runs you through the entirety of the Brexit story from the referendum to the deal via 25 drawings and explainers. Even if you're not into colouring, it's a cool memento of the political history we went through together. And if you're interested, we've added a whole new bundle to the store, whereby you can get the book and an exclusive 10 Downing Street pin absolutely free, with this pin being available nowhere else right now. You can find out more about the book by clicking the link in the description. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. If you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that is in the description below.